Have you ever wondered why some people seem to effortlessly drift away from relationships just when things get serious, leaving behind a trail of confusion and heartbreak? The answer lies in understanding how avoidant regret was built, layer by careful layer, like a fortress designed to keep love at bay. This invisible armor doesn't form overnight. Instead, it develops through years of small moments, missed connections, and a brain that learns to associate closeness with danger. Picture someone who watches their friends struggle through messy breakups and thinks they've found the secret to happiness by never getting too attached in the first place. They believe they're being smart, protecting themselves from the chaos they see around them. But here's what they don't realize. Their brain is actually rewiring itself to fear the very thing humans need most: genuine connection. This rewiring happens so gradually that most people don't even notice it's happening until they find themselves alone, wondering why everyone else seems to leave. The human mind has a fascinating way of protecting itself from pain. When faced with the possibility of rejection or abandonment, some people develop what psychologists call an avoidant attachment style. These individuals learn to suppress their need for closeness and convince themselves that independence is superior to interdependence. They become masters at keeping people at arm's length while appearing perfectly normal and even charming on the surface. But here's where the story gets interesting. The same defense mechanism that protects them from immediate emotional pain also sets them up for a much deeper kind of suffering later in life. Think of it like someone who refuses to exercise because they're afraid of getting tired. They avoid the temporary discomfort of a workout, but they're setting themselves up for much bigger health problems down the road. The avoidant person avoids the temporary vulnerability of opening up, but they're creating a future filled with loneliness and regret. This regret doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly during moments of solitude, when the distractions fade away and the silence becomes deafening. It shows up when they see couples celebrating anniversaries, when they attend weddings alone, or when they realize that all their relationships feel more like pleasant arrangements than deep connections. The very thing they thought would protect them from pain becomes the source of their greatest suffering. Understanding how this pattern develops requires looking at the invisible forces that shape human behavior. The brain operates on a simple principle: avoid pain and seek pleasure. But sometimes this system gets confused about what will actually cause pain in the long run versus what feels safe in the moment. When someone learns early in life that vulnerability leads to hurt, their brain files this information away as a survival strategy. Every time they consider opening up to someone new, this old programming kicks in like an overprotective parent, whispering warnings about all the ways things could go wrong. The tragedy is that this protective mechanism often activates at precisely the wrong moments. Just when a relationship has the potential to become something beautiful and meaningful, the avoidant person feels the strongest urge to pull away. They might suddenly notice flaws in their partner that weren't bothersome before, or they might find themselves craving space and independence. What they don't realize is that these feelings aren't necessarily accurate reflections of their true desires. They're the activation of an old defense system that can't tell the difference between genuine incompatibility and the normal vulnerability that comes with deepening intimacy. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Let me tell you about someone we'll call Marcus. Marcus was the kind of person who seemed to have everything figured out. He had a successful career, an impressive apartment, and friends who envied his seemingly effortless dating life. He moved through relationships like someone sampling fine wines, appreciating each one for its unique qualities, but never committing to buying a whole bottle. To outsiders, Marcus appeared to be living the dream. He had the freedom to pursue his interests, travel whenever he wanted, and never had to compromise on his plans for anyone else. Marcus had learned this approach early in life, watching his parents' turbulent marriage. He witnessed countless fights, threats of divorce, and the emotional roller coaster that seemed to define their relationship. As a teenager, he made a silent vow to himself that he would never allow anyone to have that kind of power over his emotional well-being. He would be different. He would be smart about love, treating it like a business transaction rather than surrendering to its chaotic demands. This strategy served him well through his 20s. While his friends dealt with dramatic breakups and heartbreak, Marcus maintained an enviable sense of stability. He dated interesting people, enjoyed their company, and moved on before things got too complicated. He told himself he was simply being practical, avoiding the inevitable disappointment that seemed to plague everyone else's romantic adventures. Like Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You, Marcus became an expert at observing relationships from the outside, analyzing what made people tick. But unlike Joe, Marcus used his insights to maintain distance rather than obsess over someone. But then something unexpected happened. Marcus met someone who didn't fit his usual pattern. Sarah was different, not because she was more beautiful or more accomplished than others he'd dated, but because she seemed to see through his carefully constructed walls without demanding that he tear them down immediately. She had a way of being present with him that felt both comfortable and slightly terrifying. For the first time in years, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about another person's inner world. The relationship developed slowly, like a plant growing towards sunlight. Sarah never pushed for definitions or dramatic declarations. She simply showed up consistently, bringing a sense of ease and warmth that Marcus hadn't realized he was missing. They fell into routines: Sunday morning coffee, walks in the park, quiet evenings reading in each other's presence. For several months, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe he had been wrong about relationships. Maybe it was possible to be close to someone without losing himself in the process. But as Sarah became more important to him, something strange started happening. Marcus began noticing things about her that irritated him. The way she left her coffee cup in the sink, her tendency to overthink decisions, the fact that she texted her friends constantly. These weren't new behaviors. Sarah had always done these things. But suddenly, they felt unbearable. Marcus found himself feeling restless and confined, as if the walls of his carefully ordered life were closing in around him. What Marcus didn't understand was that his brain was responding to a perceived threat. The closer he got to Sarah, the more his old programming kicked in, flooding his system with warning signals. His unconscious mind couldn't distinguish between healthy intimacy and dangerous vulnerability. All it knew was that someone was getting too close, and that meant it was time to activate the escape plan. So Marcus began the slow process of pulling away, convincing himself that he and Sarah simply weren't compatible after all. The end came not with a dramatic fight or betrayal, but with a gradual cooling that left Sarah confused and hurt. Marcus told her he needed space to figure things out, that he wasn't ready for something serious. He delivered these words with the practiced ease of someone who had given similar speeches before. Sarah asked if there was anything she had done wrong, and Marcus assured her there wasn't. He meant it. On a conscious level, he genuinely believed that the relationship had simply run its course naturally. But late at night, alone in his apartment, Marcus felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't relief, as he had expected. Instead, it was a hollow ache that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker as time passed. He tried to distract himself with work, travel, and new dating prospects, but the feeling persisted. He had won again. He had successfully avoided the messiness and vulnerability of deep commitment. So why did victory feel so much like loss? Years passed, and Marcus continued his pattern. He met other interesting women, enjoyed their company for a while, and moved on when things started feeling too serious. Each time, he told himself he was being honest and practical. He wasn't leading anyone on. He was simply someone who valued his independence. But with each relationship that ended, the hollow feeling grew a little deeper. Marcus began to notice couples who had been together for decades, and instead of pitying them for their lack of freedom, he found himself wondering what it would be like to have someone who knew all his stories, who had weathered life's ups and downs alongside him. The regret didn't announce itself with a dramatic revelation. Instead, it accumulated slowly, like dust settling on furniture in a house that no one visits anymore. Marcus realized that in protecting himself from the pain of potential heartbreak, he had guaranteed himself a different kind of suffering, the pain of never truly knowing what he had missed. Now you might be wondering how someone breaks free from this pattern once they recognize it. The first step is understanding that avoidant behavior often stems from what psychologists call the confirmation bias. This is the tendency to interpret new information in ways that confirm our existing beliefs. If someone believes that relationships inevitably lead to pain, they'll unconsciously look for evidence to support this belief while ignoring information that contradicts it. For the avoidant person, confirmation bias works like a selective attention filter. When their partner does something thoughtful, they might minimize its importance or assume there's an ulterior motive. But when their partner makes a small mistake or shows a moment of neediness, they interpret this as proof that the relationship is doomed. Like Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl, they become experts at finding reasons to maintain their emotional distance. But unlike Blair, they don't allow themselves the vulnerability of eventually letting someone in. The key to overcoming this pattern starts with recognizing that the voice warning you about relationship dangers isn't necessarily telling you the truth about your current situation. That voice is often just an echo from the past, a protective mechanism that outlived its usefulness. Learning to question these automatic thoughts requires developing what therapists call metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. When you notice yourself pulling away from someone who matters to you, pause and ask yourself some honest questions. Are you responding to actual problems in the relationship, or are you reacting to the discomfort of increasing closeness? Are the flaws you're suddenly noticing in your partner new developments, or things you were previously willing to accept? Most importantly, what would you lose by staying and working through these feelings versus what you might lose by running away? This kind of self-reflection isn't comfortable. It requires admitting that your tried and true strategies for protecting yourself might actually be causing you harm. It means acknowledging that the walls you built to keep pain out are also keeping love out. But here's what makes this work worthwhile. On the other side of that discomfort lies the possibility of experiencing the kind of connection you've been protecting yourself from. Another crucial step is learning to communicate about your internal experience rather than acting on it silently. When you feel the urge to withdraw, consider sharing this feeling with your partner instead of just disappearing. This might sound terrifying if you're used to handling everything internally, but it can transform a relationship-ending pattern into an opportunity for deeper understanding. You might say something like, "I'm feeling overwhelmed by how much you mean to me, and my instinct is to pull away. But I don't actually want to lose you, so I'm telling you about this feeling instead of acting on it." This kind of transparency requires courage, but it also creates space for your partner to understand what's happening rather than taking your withdrawal personally. They might be able to offer reassurance or adjust their own behavior to help you feel safer. Most importantly, by naming your avoidant tendencies out loud, you're creating accountability for yourself. It becomes much harder to disappear from someone's life when you've explicitly told them about your tendency to do exactly that. The next piece of advice might surprise you. Start small and build gradually. If you're used to keeping people at arm's length, jumping into the deep end of vulnerability will likely trigger all your defense mechanisms at once. Instead, practice letting people in a little bit at a time. Share a small worry with a friend. Ask for help with something minor. Express appreciation for someone's presence in your life. These tiny acts of openness can help you build tolerance for vulnerability without overwhelming your system. Think of it like physical exercise. If you haven't run in years, you wouldn't start with a marathon. You'd begin with short walks, then longer walks, then maybe some light jogging. Building emotional intimacy works the same way. Each small act of vulnerability makes the next one a little easier. Over time, you develop the emotional equivalent of stamina, the ability to stay present and connected even when your instincts are telling you to flee. You also need to understand the role of what psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy in avoidant relationships. This is the tendency to continue investing in something because you've already invested so much, even when it's no longer serving you. But the avoidant person often experiences the opposite. They abandon relationships precisely because they've invested so much emotional energy that the stakes start feeling too high. Recognizing this pattern means understanding that the fear you feel when a relationship becomes important isn't a sign that you should run. It's actually a sign that you've found something worth protecting. The anxiety you experience when someone becomes irreplaceable isn't a warning that you're in danger. It's proof that you're finally allowing yourself to care deeply about another human being. Here's something else to consider. Practice staying present during moments of emotional intensity instead of immediately looking for the exit. When your partner expresses strong feelings, when they're vulnerable with you, or when they want to talk about the future of your relationship, notice your impulse to change the subject or create distance. Instead of following that impulse automatically, take a breath and remind yourself that these moments of intensity are opportunities to deepen your connection rather than threats to your independence. This doesn't mean you have to agree to everything or lose yourself in the relationship. Healthy relationships require maintaining your individual identity while also creating something together that's larger than either person alone. The goal isn't to become completely dependent on another person. It's to become comfortably interdependent, able to give and receive support while still maintaining your sense of self. Finally, consider working with a therapist who specializes in attachment theory. Sometimes the patterns that keep us stuck are too deep and automatic to unravel on our own. A skilled therapist can help you identify the specific triggers that activate your avoidant tendencies and develop strategies for responding differently. They can also provide a safe relationship within which to practice vulnerability and work through the fears that keep you isolated. Like Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris, you might need to learn that opening yourself to love requires accepting uncertainty and imperfection. Emily's journey shows us that meaningful connections often require stepping outside our comfort zones and embracing experiences that don't fit neatly into our preconceived plans for how life should unfold. The path from avoidant regret to secure connection isn't quick or easy, but it's absolutely possible. It requires patience with yourself as you learn new ways of being in relationship. It means accepting that vulnerability will always feel risky, but that some risks are worth taking. Most importantly, it involves recognizing that the very thing you've been running from, deep, authentic connection with another human being, might actually be exactly what you need to feel truly alive. Understanding how avoidant regret was built is only the beginning of the story. The more important chapter is what you choose to do with that understanding. The walls you've constructed to protect yourself from pain are real, and they've served a purpose. They kept you safe during times when safety was what you needed most. But walls that protect can also imprison, and there comes a time when the cost of staying safe becomes greater than the risk of opening up. Every day, you have a choice. You can continue operating from the old programming that tells you relationships are dangerous and independence is safety. You can keep building walls higher and stronger, perfecting your ability to remain untouched by the messy, complicated, beautiful experience of loving and being loved. This path offers a certain kind of peace. The peace of knowing exactly what to expect, of never being surprised by loss, because you never allowed yourself to truly have something worth losing. But there's another path available, one that requires tremendous courage but offers something the safe path cannot: the possibility of experiencing the kind of connection that makes all the risk worthwhile. This path means accepting that love will sometimes hurt, that opening your heart makes you vulnerable to disappointment, and that the people you care about will sometimes let you down. It means choosing to stay present and engaged, even when every instinct tells you to protect yourself by pulling away. The regret that comes from a lifetime of avoiding intimacy isn't just about missed romantic opportunities. It's about all the conversations that never happened because vulnerability felt too dangerous. It's about the friendships that remained surface level because deeper connection required letting people see your flaws and fears. It's about the experiences you didn't allow yourself to have because they required depending on other people or admitting that you needed support. This regret compounds over time, like interest on a debt that's never paid. Each missed opportunity makes the next one feel more precious and therefore more terrifying. Each wall you build makes it harder to imagine what life might look like on the other side. The longer you wait to change course, the more entrenched your patterns become, and the more courage it takes to choose differently. But here's the truth that might surprise you. It's never too late to begin again. Regardless of how many relationships you've ended prematurely, how many people you've kept at arm's length, or how convinced you've become that you're simply not a relationship person, you retain the capacity to change. Your brain remains capable of forming new neural pathways, of learning different responses to intimacy and vulnerability. The same plasticity that allowed you to develop avoidant patterns in the first place can be harnessed to create healthier ways of connecting. The first step is making a commitment to yourself, not necessarily a commitment to find love or fix all your relationships, but a commitment to show up differently in your interactions with others. This might mean staying in conversations that feel emotionally charged instead of finding excuses to leave. It might mean expressing appreciation for people in your life rather than keeping those feelings private. It might mean asking for help when you need it, rather than struggling alone to maintain your image of self-sufficiency. These small changes create ripple effects that extend far beyond romantic relationships. When you allow yourself to be known by friends, colleagues, and family members, you practice the skills you'll need for intimate partnership. When you learn to tolerate the discomfort of depending on others in low-stakes situations, you build capacity for the interdependence that healthy relationships require. Every act of vulnerability makes the next one slightly less terrifying. Remember that change isn't linear, and setbacks are part of the process. There will be moments when your old patterns reassert themselves, when the pull toward isolation feels stronger than your commitment to connection. These moments aren't failures. They're opportunities to practice responding with compassion rather than self-judgment. Each time you notice yourself falling back into avoidant behavior and choose to course correct, you strengthen your ability to stay present with others, even when it feels difficult. The alternative, continuing down the path that created your current patterns, offers no real mystery. You already know where it leads because you're living it now. You know the particular flavor of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't really know you. You understand the weight of carrying your struggles alone and the exhaustion that comes from constantly managing other people's access to your inner world. What you don't know is what might unfold if you chose differently. You don't know what it would feel like to have someone who loves you, not despite your flaws, but because they see you as a complete human being worthy of care and acceptance. You don't know the relief that comes from sharing your burdens rather than carrying them alone, or the joy of celebrating your successes with someone who genuinely understands their significance to you. The path forward requires faith in possibilities you haven't experienced yet. It requires believing that vulnerability can lead to safety rather than betrayal, that intimacy can enhance rather than diminish your sense of self, and that the right person will see your tendency toward avoidance as something to work with rather than something that makes you unlovable. This journey isn't just about finding romantic love. It's about reclaiming your full capacity for human connection. It's about refusing to let fear make decisions about what your life will contain. It's about recognizing that the very traits that make you good at independence, your self-awareness, your ability to be alone, your capacity for deep thought, can also make you an incredible partner when combined with willingness to let someone else matter to you. Take the first step today. Reach out to someone you care about and tell them something true about your inner experience. Express gratitude to someone who has shown you kindness. Ask for support with something you're struggling with. These simple acts might feel insignificant, but they're actually revolutionary for someone who has spent years maintaining emotional distance. They're proof that you're ready to write a different story about what connection means and what you're capable of experiencing. The regret that brought you here doesn't have to define what happens next. It can serve as motivation to choose courage over comfort, presence over protection, and authentic connection over the illusion of safety that comes from keeping everyone at arm's length. Your future self is waiting to see what you'll decide.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.